So I'll start off the introduction. So thank everyone for joining this afternoon. This is the 5-week course, Contract Strategy for Civil Engineers, undertaken on behalf of Thames Valley Early Careers Network on the ICE. The course will be provided by Dr. John Broom, who's joined us now. John is a trained civil engineer and has over 25 years of experience as a consultant, being recognised as an expert practitioner on the NEC contract family and on contracts and procurements for projects and programmes. His list of publications includes authoring the NEC4 A User's Guide, which is available in the ICE bookshop.
Okay, thank you very much. So welcome to Contract Strategy, brackets using NEC for civil engineers. Why using NEC? Well, partly because I know NEC pretty darn well, but also because you probably use it more than others. But we are going to be looking at a lot of the principles, the words we use, like performance bond. Other contracts have them, but it's going to be sort of focusing on NEC. But I will draw comparisons. So in terms of the course aims for the 5 1.5-hour sessions, for you to understand the terminology, the tools, the processes used to allocate risk and reward in construction contracts. And what by that I mean include professional services contracts. Why risk and reward? Because if you're allocating risk, you're allocating reward. If I allocate a risk and put it in the contract and the contractor puts in a sum for it, or a consultant, let's not forget the consultants, then, and it doesn't occur, the contractor will have made more money. Yeah. So therefore they get a reward. If they manage it well, so that only partially occurs, they will have made money. So that is reward. And of course, risk, all the definitions of risk talk about opportunity as well. So it can be upside opportunity, if you like. So as I said before, it's especially under the NEC4 family of contracts, because that's what I know about. And it's from the big to the small picture. And we're going to start with the big picture. So a lot of when we come on to the next slide, which is about what we're going to cover, or next but one slide, it is a bit conceptual, it is a bit theoretical and process rather than hard practical. But if you start doing this without a sort of conceptual or theoretical background, I don't think you've got a compass, if you like. You're just reacting or doing what other people do rather than going back to first principles. And as a result of doing this course, hopefully at the end, you'll be able to intelligently contribute to the development of a good contract strategy so that projects are more successful. Now, if you work so that could be as a consultant working for a client. As a contractor, it could be, hang on, this isn't good. Yeah. Are we interested in doing this project? So in terms of the program, it's as per what publicised, except up here, I've switched overview of the NEC's objectives to the end of this course. You can review that, read this, but briefly, principles, process, concepts, with a quick view of what we're going to actually look at in more detail. On the 8th next week, we'll look at the members of the family of the contract. I would hope that we finish that and perhaps start moving on to the contract strategy choices, focusing primarily on the main payment options. So first level is what member of the family are we going to use? Second level is which main payment option, which affects, obviously, if you're reimbursing the contractor essentially their cost plus a percentage fee, there's a lot less risk on them compared with if you're saying, give me a price for doing this under an option A, and I hope very little is going to change. Down to here, secondary options. And as we're reviewing the secondary options, in fact, as we're doing the main payment options for target cost contracts, looking at entries in the contract data, which sort of fine tune and refine it. So if we're going to specify limitations of liability, for instance, what's the entry in the contract data in the engineering construction contract, which caps those? Okay. And 29th is finish off and a bit of a review. So what are we going to do today? Objectives, agenda, ground rules is the next slide. bit about me so you know where I'm coming from. We're then going to start with procurement strategy, so that now I want to procure a project which might consist of multiple contracts. That's the big picture. How do we get down to a contract, and then principles around the contract strategy? There's a bit of reflection for you outside, but a mini exercise, and then an overview of NEC's three main objectives, just as a sort of preview of where we're going, shall we say. But the focus will be on the flexibility aspect. Ground rules. This is being recorded, so that hopefully we hope so that others can watch it, and that will be. I'll give people who have signed up or Vardan a link to it. I do really like to have some cameras on, if you're happy, because otherwise I'm basically talking at a bunch of blobs on the screen. So if you want to put your cameras on, hopefully that means I can see you. Any takers? Not that I can see at the moment. Don't be shy. I'm just flicking through my no one's turned their blob on, if you like. So I'm just looking at blobs apart from a picture of me. Sound off, accepting conversation. So feel free to ask questions. That's what makes training comes alive, relating it to your points. Particularly if thank you very much, Michael. I'm your number one fan now. Right, okay. So do ask questions. If you've put your virtual hand up, I've got 7 rows, so hopefully it'll shuffle it to a screen which I can see, or put the questions in the sidebar. But if I say something which you don't understand, my role as an adult, as a trainer, is to say it in differently. With this number of people and without your cameras on, I can't see if I've lost people. I can't see if I've lost an individual person or I've lost you as a group. So if I say something you don't understand, please put in the sidebar. I'll make sure the sidebar is on, the chat is on, and ask it. So moving on. So primary sources of this course in terms of books, etc. So it started over here actually, but this is the 3rd edition of my book, which is on the 4th edition of the NEC. The 1st edition of my book was on the 2nd edition of the NEC. And the reason was because I'd finished research way back in 1998 on it. And I think the first book was published in 2000. That research looked at a number of projects. And one of the things I said was, well, actually, some of these projects, rather than being, as is my tagline, set up for success, they were actually set up to fail through poor contract strategy. Okay. So whereas others seem to be much better set up. So as a result of my initial research, which was under Professor John Perry, who was the co-instigator of the NEC, but also had done a lot of research on target and cost reimbursable contracts and management contracts, we basically said at the time partnering was around and it was just full of wishy-washiness, be nice to each other, etc. And our basic premise was, hang on, people act, or organizations act the way they do because that's the way they're motivated to do it. All right. So as Latham said a couple of years or a few years earlier in his report, can't set the ground rules. If you don't like the results, change the ground rules by which the contractors play, if you like. And that is partly about procurement strategy in its widest sense, which I'll come on to a definition of. So that led to the publication of this appallingly grey and dull book in terms of the cover, from which I vowed afterwards I would always have veto rights on what the cover looked like in my books, on procurement routes for partnering. And that was a sort of magnus opus on the research that I'd done post doing my NEC research on contract strategies. So I looked at incentivization, use of incentives in America, alliances from the oil industry, and target cost contracts, which has started to be used in the UK construction industry. Quite a few years later, having been chaired the contracts and procurement SIG of the Association for Project Management, we actually managed to get our guide out. That is a generic guide for all projects, so we were trying to make it specific enough to be useful, but pan sector. Some of the slides come from the opening sessions on that. And then actually going back to this one, when we start to go into the detail of the different options, thank you, Andrew, for turning your camera on. When we go into the details of which main option, which secondary options, a lot of the material can be found in there. So plug buy it, but also you should Dan should have forwarded or will be forwarding a copy of these slides as well, if you want to take notes on them, around them. So that's the sort of academic book. Consultancy wise, I've done contract strategy assignments ranging from millions to billions. I think my biggest one was £16.5 billion program of works. My home sector is very definitely heavy engineering construction, but I have done assignments in coal mining, in New Zealand, shipbuilding, defence, aerospace, in other sectors, if you like. And I both work with lawyers and draft contracts myself. So sometimes I devise the contract strategy and we sort of hand it over to a lawyer to write it, and then I review it and say, is that reflective of what we were getting at? Other times I work with the lawyer, or the lawyer sort of says, oh, John, you clearly know what you're doing, you draft it, and they sort of check on it and so on. And I very much like doing that stuff in collaboration with people, utilising expertise. I also help with bids, which means I see the other side of it. You know, what scares contractors and consultants in terms of, blimey, we're not entering into a contract under those terms, but also what makes it attractive. And I also get involved in resolving disputes, which might well be over the actual specific words of the contract. That's what the dispute's over, but fundamentally it's because people's objectives have diverged, all right, which is at a big picture is what about contract strategy is about. So hopefully that convinces you that I might know what I'm talking about, but the proof of the pudding will be in the words that come out of my mouth from now on. So this is when you see slides like this is in the old APM, Association for Project Management, formatting, branding, etc. When the guide came out, I have the slides, we'll use them, I'm giving credit to them. So ignoring the introduction, this is the procurement and contract life cycle. So, and we've presented it roughly sequentially, but one of the reasons why these overlap is because there are feedback loops, decisions made here, feedback there, but it's roughly sequentially. What we're going to focus in on certainly from the end of today on, but we're going to cover the principles and process is here, but we're going to cover a little bit around that, and we're going to cover how it affects that down there as well, the downstream decisions. Okay, so when we wrote the APM's Guide to Contracts and Procurement, we actually departed from what the Association for Project Management's definition of procurement is, because we didn't believe it was right, it was wide enough, because the APM's guide for procurement, or the APM's definition of procurement, is solely for goods and services. All right. Now, legally, you could argue when you buy a construction project, you're buying goods, yeah. But in actual fact, you're not buying off-the-shelf goods. You're actually buying a mini project, yeah, as in a unique endeavor, which has unique features over a period of time. And because it happens over a period of time, it's subject to risk and change and so on. So it's in procurement terms, it's called a relationship-based contract. Okay. But we said actually at the extreme, you might be buying benefits. Yeah. So you're buying a project, a mini project. If I go up here, let's say I'm buying as Microsoft are, and in America, they are buying an offtake from a nuclear facility which is being restarted up. They are buying, if you like, in terms of procurement, power, yeah, performance and guaranteed power. Don't know why someone muted me then. Okay, not a good sign. But anyway, and when you start to get up to this level here, you're looking at PFI or public-private finance initiative type purchases, where you're buying. So one of my clients is Connect Plus. They run the M25. That is effectively or one of they are paid, or certainly not paid, they have deductions made if the motorway is not open. Yeah. So you're paying for a motorway which is kept open, a capability, in the belief that that will give benefits to you. And it's rare that you get benefits, but it can be up there. So one of the things I would like you to think about is to think about the definition of a project in a different way. And it goes something like this. Someone identifies the need or opportunity for a space. It's a bubble in someone's mind. Yep. How do you develop that? Well, actually, you will say, what will be the benefits to stakeholders once this project is completed? Okay. Having done that, we need to say at the end of the project delivery phase, what are its success criteria? We won't know if the project is a success until it's been operating for a while, etc., and so on, and actually delivering those benefits. But at the end of the delivery of the project phase, going back from those benefits, how will we know if it's a success? Yeah, or we think it's on course to be a success. And the more hard you can make those criteria, the better. To deliver that success criteria, we've got to have certain capabilities. Yeah. And to deliver that capability, we've got to have deliverables. All right. The main components of the solution, shall we say, or the capabilities, down to the completed design. So go back to my next, my client Connect Plus. Let's say someone says this junction always gets blocked up at rush hour. Yeah. Wouldn't it be good if we could reduce the blocking up of that junction and stuff and traffic not getting off fast, but also going back onto the main motorway? Yes, that'd be a good idea. Okay, what's the benefits to stakeholders? Well, if you're going off leftwards, if we put in a filter lane, we're getting into capabilities. Yep. Or deliver. If people can filter off left, shall we say, much quicker, they'll get round the junction much quicker. Yeah. And be able to go to work much quicker. That will free up more space on the other two lanes for people to go faster. Right. So what's the actual capability we want? Whoops, sorry. What we want is people to filter off left faster. Yeah. And that will also mean there's less backup on the motorway. What's the capabilities we need? Well, another lane. Yeah. If we put in another lane, we've got to look at drainage, etc. The main components of it, okay, are the deliverables. And then the goods and services are the specific designs. Okay. So one of the things is, as you work your way down here, what level are we procuring at? Are we writing a contract for success criteria? So one of my clients, a water company, in their most recent early contractor involvement arrangements, it starts off with literally a half-page statement of what they want this to do. We want a new sewage treatment centre which does treat so much sewage at Y% efficiency. That's your brief. Go away and work up the best way of doing it. And we'll then enter into the construction contract at this level when they've designed it. But the initial brief is up at that level. Okay. So just to pause, does that make sense to any people? And if not, any questions? I'm not seeing any questions or any chat. Okay, so Joanne has said, I've not received a copy of the slides yet. Dan, if you're still on, I assume you're somewhere. Can you make sure that they do get sent out pretty promptly? Personally, I like slides before because then I can take notes on them. Okay, hope that makes sense to you, but it's a different way of thinking of defining a project. And what I see quite often is people are vague and wishy-washy around this levels, and then that results in stuff which doesn't need being built, yeah, or potentially being built. Or I come along and review the contract strategy and say, these are where you're vague and wishy-washy. Go back and start again, yeah, something like that. So we have the new definition of procurement. What does procurement entail? It includes deciding the package breakdown structure. So we have a project, we decompose it into the relevant packages, a package which we're going to either do internally or let out under a contract. For each of those packages, we need to determine three things. The contracting strategy, which at a high level is the allocation of risk and reward. That will determine how much I pay for it, how I need to manage it, etc. We need to write the contract documents, which are reflective of that contract strategy. So years ago, one of my sponsors for my secondary research was National Power. And I remember they saying, too often we don't brief the designers. We're doing a design and build route or a performance spec route, and they go off and do a complete design. Yeah, it doesn't fit together. So contract documents reflect that contract strategy. I've also seen lawyers write lots of clauses which undermine that contract strategy. So a client who wants to collaborate selects a target cost contract, and then the lawyer writes lots of clauses which make it hard to administrate, mean the client will have to constantly be checking on the contractor, etc. That's not good for collaboration. And it reflects how you actually select and award the contract. Because if it's a cost reimbursable contract, there is no meaningful prices. There might not be any meaningful scope to price. So how do you select them? The party to do it. And all that leads into the effective management and administration of the contracts once entered into. The analogy I use is this is about dealing the cards. Yeah, the site team, when they've got a contract, or the contract team can only play the cards they're dealt. This is about the cards that are dealt to that contract team. Yeah, okay. So 2 quotes before we move on to illustrate the importance. One is really, really quite old. It's from 1991, but I think it's still relevant. On the one hand, I could say, I think procurement is even more important because of the range of options available. On the other hand, we can say, actually, technology has moved on and is so complex now. Technology can seriously affect the contract outcomes. So probably still just as relevant. And the other one is this from Warren Buffett. So more comments are being received about haven't received the slides. I think Dan hopefully has got the message. They will be circulated at some point. Warren Buffett is the world's greatest investor. He would actually be the world's richest man if he hadn't given 60% of his fortune away to charity. And he says it's impossible to unsign a contract, so do all your thinking before you sign it. And I could not agree more. the amount of times I go in and I'm involved in trying to resolve a dispute, and I think, not if people had done a little bit more thought, not only would we not be encountering the physical problem which is causing all those costs, but we wouldn't be having a big argument around who's liable for those costs. And all the time that you're having an argument about who's liable for costs, actually the parties aren't properly managing it and the problem's getting bigger. When I was doing that, this is an old slide, is actually I thought about this book, which hopefully you can see it the right way round. It's a sort of it's by Ben Flyberg and Dan Gardner on how big things get done. Basically, Ben Flyberg has the biggest statistical database on mega projects, and what makes them successful and what makes them unsuccessful. And it could be a bit high level, but that is designed to be a very accessible book. One of the principles he has is think slow, act fast. As in, think before you sign, then you can act fast. You don't want to be changing your mind once a contract is signed. You don't want to be arguing about risk allocation and once a contract signed, etc. How we're going to deal with it. You want to do your thinking before you start incurring the costs, ideally avoiding the costs. So when should you be making the big decisions? Well, from here, looking at this diagram, it's kind of obvious to me. Yeah, the big decisions should be made here when they can have the biggest effect, not when you're actually in the proverbial. Okay. So back to basics. As I inferred, contracts allocate risk. So let's just and let's view that risk in the broadest sense. You know, if I'm giving a scope of works to a party, it is in the belief that they can deliver it, they can manage the risk better than if I did it myself, and better than other people can do it. And that risk can be a number of things. It's, have you got the capabilities? Have you got the financial standing? Have you got the capacity to deliver it? And that also applies to me. So quick definition of risk. If I put it up there, I don't think it's controversial. I haven't given a source for that, but it's an amalgam of different ones. I think if you look at the risk literature, they confuse or they're not clear about risk as a source, which is what I'm thinking, and the uncertainty over project outcomes that it creates. So for me, when I'm talking about risk, and I'm being precise, I'm talking about the cause of uncertainty, and uncertainty is what results. So a project with lots of individual risks naturally has a lot of uncertainty about the outcome. Okay. So if that is a definition of risk, let's think about principles of risk allocation and sharing, so the most popular expression of how you should allocate risk is, well, obviously you allocate it to the party best able to manage it. People heard that? The two people who have their cameras on, can you nod? Because that's the only feedback I'm getting, right? Thank you very much, right? Well, okay, I would like a lot more cameras on, but I'll ask this question. How many of the people, of the 99 people we have, which probably includes me, have your own home? All right. If you put your hands up, this is the audience participation bit. Hands up if you own your own home. So rising up to 31, and now declining, 31-ish, right, okay. So let me ask you this. Who can best control whether your house gets burgled? You or the insurance company? You? Yeah. Who can best control or influence whether your house burns down? You or the insurance company? You. In which case, why do you insure your house when you're best able to control that risk? Right. Well, I would suggest it's this is because the number one factor in allocating risk is you consider the effect on the party you've allocated it to. Okay. And that's why you insure your home, because if your home burns down, it's a statistic for the insurance company, whereas for you, it's your life gone up in flames. Yeah. And that's why you allocate it. So let's think about that in contracts. If I allocate a risk to an organization and they will go bust, they will become insolvent if it occurs, we will have a big argument about it, and then they will go insolvent and it will revert to me ultimately. All right. And all the time we're having an argument about it, we won't be managing that risk. So we're getting bigger. Now, the step back from that is, well, if it's a, if it's a big risk for them and they won't go bankrupt, but they're going to really, they're going to fight it tooth and nail, the same, it won't be managed and they'll probably find some other ways of getting out of it, etc. It's also, if you allocate a risk to someone who's going to hurt, then then they will put a premium in there at the very least. So you could have a risk which is of the same magnitude, but depending upon the financial strength of the party, they might put a bigger premium in on it. So let's say, do two examples. One is, let's say I'm a small factory owner and I'm having a once in 15 years factory extension and it's for £10 million. And there's risk and uncertainty in it. I might prefer, and I'm getting it's a standard warehouse that I'm doing, and I'm going to be contracting probably with some big contractors who do these day in, day out, yeah, and have a turnover of £1 billion. Those contractors, partly because they know how to manage it, might be quite prepared to have a contract which has £1 million of risk in it, yeah, because they know statistically, A, they can manage it, but B, 1 in 20 projects goes wrong, but 19 go right. Yeah. So it's a statistic for them relatively. On the other hand, let's reverse it and let's say I'm a big company with £1 billion turnover and I'm having a 10 million specialist facility built, and it's a big specialist facility. There's only a couple of organizations which do it in the world. And if I transfer all the risk to them, they're going to actually absolutely charge a fortune for it, because if those risks occur and they haven't got a big figure in there, they'll become insolvent. So the size of the party and the effect on the business is the number one determinant, in my view, of whether you allocate risk to them, or, being clever, whether you share risk with them. And that could be, if you manage this risk well, I will pay you an incentive. Yeah. We then get on to the management bit, and it's who can best influence it happening, who can best influence the risk happening, because all things being equal, and I'm not sure what that means in practice, right, is you want, either if it's a downside, a negative threat, you want them to manage the risk out. And if it's an opportunity, you want them to manage the risk in and make it happen. And all things being equal, it's for negative risk, downside risk, who can best mitigate the consequences. And those can be in conflict. So for instance, you could say, in terms of physical conditions, if we allocate the risk, put a risk in the contract, it's the employer who can best influence whether a unexpected physical condition happens by doing good site surveys, etc. But I'll just finish this. But it's the contractor who controls the resources, so can best manage it if unexpected risks occur. So someone was about to say something, or did they just accidentally press their speak button. I think they just accidentally press their speak button. Okay. So, and then down here, you actually want clarity over the above for minor, especially frequently occurring risks. Why is that? Because, and generally allocated to the contracting party. And the reason is because you don't want frequent arguments over whose risk it is and how much, all right? It might just be better to allocate it clearly to the contracting party. So if it occurs, they know it's theirs. They just get on and deal with it. All right. But you might decide to share it. So, for instance, and this is where uncertainty, if you like, under a target cost contract, the risks within the target prices are effectively shared. Okay. And originally these were my shorthand, based actually on Abrahamson's work, who was a lawyer involved in NEC, but going back a slightly earlier, Martin Barnes, who was also the co-instigator of NEC. And originally it was just these things which I put in. And then I got out into the real world and this thing came into play. All right. So why does attitude to risk matter? Well, let me give you an example. Who is the biggest, who in this country, which organization has the biggest pockets? So big that they can even print money. Yeah. They can raise taxation, etc. Yes, Oliver, the government. Yeah, absolutely. And Cameron, the government have the biggest pockets. Who works for the government? Civil servants. So by this logic, yeah, the government should be a risk-taking organisation. Is the average civil servant a gung-ho, risk-taking, entrepreneurial type of person? No, yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. So there's now so queer as people. This is the logic. This is, this is why you insure your house with an insurance company, as opposed to, because it's bigger than those. This is the logical stuff. But you've got attitude, culture, etc., all mixed in there. Okay. So you have to, and that when we come to market consultation, you have to take account of. So this stuff is relevant when you're writing contracts, and this is it in shorthand effectively, and the risk attitude. But it also affects these things. So when you're preparing a contract and you've decided to allocate risk, you want to make sure the big picture is not undermined by the drafting. So that could be I gave examples before, the national power and the designers. The example I had where the client decided to use a target cost contract, which essentially shares the uncertainty of the outcomes, the financial outcome, but their lawyer had written an extra page and a half of disallowed costs, which said, if you do this, we'll disallow it. If we do that, we'll disallow it. If you measure if your chippy measures twice, disallowed. Yeah. And I remember being in a meeting and turning to the client and saying, so you're using a target cost contract because you want to cooperate with the contractor. Part of that is you haven't got the capability, the people, to deliver it on your own. What will happen if you're constantly going round after the contractor disallowing costs? Do you think that's going to help collaboration? No. Do you have the capability, the people, to enforce this? No. What's your normal fee percentage for your smaller contracts, which you've run with these clauses in it? 15%. Is your budget constrained? Yes. So are you prepared in that contract to effectively pay $1.5 million? Is $1.5 million? Yeah, $1.5 million extra in fee for this risk transfer, which you can't enforce? She said no. So I said, if you want to put more risk on the contractor, the easiest way is just to change the plain gain share formula, not to write all this extra stuff. So that can undermine, and I see that frequently. Someone I know in the audience is on HS2, and you can really see it in that contract. At the pre-qualification stage, you're trying to eliminate those without the financial capacity to bear the risk. You're too small for this contract. Yeah. You might be big, but when I look at your books, you're a Carillion or an ISG. And you don't have the technical experience to manage this risk. At the ITT stage, what are your project-specific proposals? Do your people have the experience of projects of this similar sort? Are they able to manage the risk which we're going to allocate you in the contract, given its nature? And during the contract, we want to make sure that what we think risks that we've allocated to the contractor aren't undermined by our actions during the contract. All right, so a risk reverts back to us because we haven't done something in the contract, or we've exceeded it. So a more recent one, for instance, was allocation of costs if the contractor, for me, terminated a subcontractor, and if they terminated properly, the subcontractor would have borne all the main contractor's costs in getting in another subcontractor, etc. But they didn't follow the contract, and they ended up having to pay the fee percentage on the remainder of their outstanding work to that subcontractor, even though they were absolutely appalling. So if you don't follow the contract, the risk allocation, if things happen, can be undermined. So a bit more on these things. That's, if you like, principles. A bit more on these things, looking at the time. Yeah. So how do we determine the project procurement strategy? So this is about the project before we've broken it down into the packages. So we break it down into packages, contractual packages, or contractual packages which we're going to outsource, and some of the stuff we're going to do internally. So what are our make or buy criteria? All right. What are we going to do ourselves? Do we have some criteria, or are we just going, yeah, sounds a good idea if we do it. Yeah, sounds a good idea if the supply chain does it. Right. And what's going to be the high level, having broken it down into those packages, what's the high level approach that we're going to do it? Do we need to collaborate on this, are we buying a widget off the shelf, in which case it's a transactional contract? So, determining the nature of that. So for externally sourced packages, so, we're a big client, or we're a repeat order client. We have capability to manage projects, but this is a big project. Do we have the capacity to manage it? Yeah. Well, okay, we do have the capacity, but not the other stuff which we normally do. So do we actually get in someone external to manage the other stuff while we're doing this, because it's a big one? Or do we get someone external in to help us manage it, the big one? Yeah. Do we retain decision-making authority, or do we give it to the external consultant as the project manager? What's the right levels of outsourcing? So for externally sourced packages, we're trying to determine the collaborative to transactional spectrum. There's a slide on that, the next slide, or next couple of slides. High level contract strategy, is it cost plus or not? And provider selection strategy, is it a quality or a cost driven one? And if it's a complex procurement, we might need to go out to the market and say, we're thinking of doing this. Is that of interest to you? Is this project of interest to you? What do you think? Yep. Because if it's novel and unique, the supply chain is naturally going to be a little bit, hang on, not sure about that. So you need to, at the very least, warm them up and hopefully take on board some of their comments. This is a flow chart which we did in the guide, the APM's guide. at the high level, it's a thinking process. So we break the we have our brief, the business case. We break it into a project breakdown structure, where probs is what we called it, which is the relative components of the project, if you like, what needs to be done. We have some make or buy criteria. We understand the market. We might need to consult it, but what we're doing is we're developing it into a package breakdown structure. And that is, what of these elements here do we put together in one package, one contract? So do we put, in the simple terms, the question might be, do we put design and build together? Or do we have set them as separate contracts? All right. Do we have a separate design consultant and a project management consultant? Well, on a big project, that might be the right thing to do. Or do we have one consultant who does it, consultant C who does it all? Those sort of things, those sort of decisions lead to the packages. And then we make some recommendations about the nature of the relationship, which affects the contract strategy, leads into the contract strategy and the selection process. So putting these slides, I'm going to rush through them, really. It's an iterative process. It's a consultative process for a project of any complexity. You need to bounce it off stakeholders. You develop the probs from the top. What does it look like? Well, we've got an example here for a solar power station at the different levels. Because you haven't got the slides, I'll just stop speaking for a little bit and have you look down it and get a feel for it. And let's say this was a mega power station where you could get the big boys involved. Yeah, they would be interested. And they might even be interested in forming joint ventures, a design and a contractor and a civils and an M&E. It might be, if it was a big enough, that you could specify at this level. Yeah, say we want a solar power station located here. It's got to produce this amount of electricity. Our operating requirements are this. Yeah. But if it's a relatively small one in the southwest of England in a farmer's field, and you say, would the market be warm enough to doing that? Probably not. You probably have to, at the very least, let it into a civils package and let do this, the deliverables, if you like, the civils package, the installation of the solar panels package, and probably connections and so on. So that's where you've got to look at supplier capability, if you like, and know the market. What's your internal capacity? What's the external potential to provide it? And are they willing to supply it? Is the market hot? Or is it depressed? If it's depressed, it might be that price-based contract is the right way to go because you'll get a good price. On the other hand, if the market's hot, they might look at it and say, well, we're going to charge a huge premium for it because we don't need the market, need the work. So how do you make it attractive? And I should have said before I'm doing these slides, I am deliberately going through them fast because it's the lead into contract strategy. Make or buy, key factor is the client's organizational internal capacity, what you can do yourself, and external capacity is what's the market capable of delivering, and how do you divide it up into these packages. And just an example, here's a couple of make or buy criteria just in the slides. So again, I'll just give you a little chance to get a feel for that, but just by looking at that slide. And what you want is you want to get it to the package breakdown structure, as we called it. All right. So how we've divvied up the project into contract packages. And I suppose the main considerations are economies of scale. It's much easier to deal with one rather than lots. Yeah. And therefore, if you and you might get a good deal if you do that. Yeah. But on the other hand, if you get, for instance, if you go to a main contractor as opposed direct to the specialist who do the work, you are paying for a level of administration over and above than if you went to the individual specialists. But you're gaining perhaps they have purchasing economies of scale. One of the advantages of going to a main contractor as opposed to the direct to the specialist and coordinating yourself is single point responsibility. But do you want, if it's a big project, you might, how much single points of responsibility do you want, or do you want to break it further down, or do you want to, just have one person? Because if the more interfaces you have, the more you've got to manage them. And again, here's a little thing based on a true story. This is taken from an Excel spreadsheet, and it was a wind farm in New Zealand, I think. Many years ago, which someone gave to me. But you can see how they've got at the top level, there's the business case for a wind farm. You've got the components, the sub-components in here. And who's going to do the technical requirement? Who's going to do the detailed design, supply, install, and commission? And they've broken it down that way to try and make sure they capture everything. And what you want is hard boundaries between the contracts or between the packages. So what do I mean by that? I'm going to try and avoid having a rant about collaboration, right? Because it's one of my bête noirs. When NEC4 was launched, and I went to the launch event, collaborative working was the buzzword used in every third sentence. And my view is an over-reliance on collaboration has led, or partnering years ago, has led to a lot of unsuccessful projects if it is seen as replacing good procurement and contract management practices. Right? In terms of procurement, the ideal that you want is you want no overlaps between these different packages. In an ideal world, you could define a package and say, this is the inputs, this is the outputs, this is what you've got to do. There are no interdependencies with others, or we've given a big enough break in time and technical between other people. We've defined it well, and we're giving it to you because you're the best person to do it. Get on and do it. And it's a hands off. Yeah. Yeah. Just do it. Do what we've said because you're the capable of doing it. And in an ideal world, we don't need any collaboration because we can do that. And we should strive for that. But notice what I'm saying. I prefaced everything with in an ideal world. Yeah. But I think we should remember that what we're trying to do is create, definitive barriers. This is your scope of work. This in this package. This is in there. Yeah. Not grey areas and overlaps, and not as few interdependencies as possible. That just makes it more complex. That makes it the chances of risks occurring, increases, etc. And yes, collaboration, cooperation when we can't do that, but not as a replacement for doing that. So I'm not that keen on this diagram, but a lot of people say, oh, I really like it, John, so I've kept it in. Okay. And then what we go leading into contract strategy, what is the nature of the relationship for each contract package? The type of package with respect to profit, impact, and provider risk. the levels of relative investment, which is governed by the size, partly by the size of the organizations. So what might be a big contract to the client is a small contract to the contractor, or vice versa. And the complexity and riskiness of the undertaking versus the expected lifetime of the relationship. So what we're sort of doing is plotting it on this. So am I a big repeat order client, such as a Heathrow Airport, say? I can have long-term relationships because I'm a repeat order, and it's a complex live site. So the projects with lots of technology, so the projects are going to be complex and risky, all right? Or at the other extreme, am I buying widgets? And if we try and fit on the different contract strategies, which we're going to explore in later courses, we can start to broadly fit these things on here, depending upon the complexity, the degree of uncertainty, and the length of relationships. And this is a very approximate diagram. Being geeks, contracts and procurements geeks, we had multiple arguments over this in the contracts and procurement SIG about, oh no, this should be a little bit up, this should be a little bit up there. I think the alliances could extend over there. It should be further down there, etc. So it is, illustrative of it. Okay, and if you don't know what some of these things mean, we'll explore them, and hopefully by the end of the 5 sessions you will. But this is a simple way of thinking about it. Degree of complexity and uncertainty, length of relationship. Okay, so those are sort of the background on these bits, the project procurement strategy, before we start to get into the package contract strategy. So let's start to get into those. So years ago, someone said to me, John, when you're developing a contract strategy, what's your thought process? And I had to stop and think, blimey, that's a good one. What is my thought process? And I came up with something like this. There is an information phase, and this follows good decision-making theory. So if you look at almost any decision-making process, whether it's coaching, facilitation, one-to-one therapy even, there's something around an information phase. So this is gathering information. And the things I'm looking to understand. So, if I go into, especially if I go into a sector where I'm not familiar with, I want to understand the organizational and industry drivers and constraints. Okay. So how does this industry operate? Is it a very fragmented industry? Is it very big? So when I was doing my assignment in the aerospace sector, design houses were completely separate from manufacturers at tier 2 level. So Airbus didn't contract with someone to design and build a component. They contract with someone to design a component and then give it to someone to manufacture it. Completely separate. Okay. What are the project objectives? And so often I see looseness in this. There's a certain project which is at a World Heritage Site. It's in the centre of London, and it's to repair a tower where things are falling off. And originally, in the original contract strategy brief, it said this is a cost-driven project. And I started to review the contract strategy and I said, rubbish, right? First of all, I've talked to your senior people and they've said, if a project's overrunning, we always manage to get money from somewhere. If this project, if you repair it, having put up huge amounts of scaffolding, and then you take it down and bits of the masonry start falling off it again, instead of having to put up the scaffolding in 20 years' time, you'll have to put up the protective scaffolding, pretty much straight away. And it's a World Heritage Site. It's a quality-driven project. All right. And when we look at cost, it's not least cost or cost certainty. It's something around value for money and forecasting, knowing where it's going. So if it is exceeding, you can find the money and delay other projects, etc. So I find so often this is really imprecisely done, just political. The main thing I think that you get or be clear about is it certainty that people want, or is it minimization? All right. So if I'm a council and I've got a government budget, a government grant to do this project, if I overrun that grant, I have to find the money from my back pocket. Yeah. If I underrun it, though, I actually have to pay back the money. Yeah. So actually what I want is the biggest bang for the same buck. Whereas if I'm a government department and I've got an annual budget of, I know, $1.5 billion or 2 billion, and one project overruns, I'll delay another one on, and another one will underrun or to balance it out. So I've got a portfolio of projects. So it's more actually, I want minimum overall cost, whole life cost perhaps, and I want to know where it's going. So I can do that adjustment. We want to know the threats and the opportunities, and we want to understand the market and what their strengths and weaknesses are, both their technical strengths and their financial strengths or weaknesses. Are they used to taking this risk? Have they got evidence of managing it, and so on? And having got that information phase and gone round stakeholders, which includes the people who deliver it, it's actually prioritizing it, because amongst stakeholders in a complex one, patch the hole or resurface the road decision. I can see that that's relevant, if you like. Yeah, it's actually prioritizing it, because different stakeholders have different views, and until you've got that written down and signed off, what you don't want is a contract strategy is based on least cost, and then it turns out to be cost certainty once you've let the contract. So you want to get that consensus by the key stakeholders, and effectively it's signed off. And that's part of what I've done. I remember for the coal mining one, the reason why I was brought in there was because the contractors were going, we don't really know what they're asking us to do. Right. So I was introduced to the board of the New Zealand Coal Company, and I worked with them to get clear about what they were actually trying to achieve. And it was because before it was a smorgasbord of stuff. And then what we do is we choose the best fit contract strategy, including the second tier options, so target, cost, alliance, whatever. And then we choose the best fit conditions of contract. Hang on, John. People will say, if you're an NEC geek, surely you choose the NEC before. No, because you will look at the nature of the project and say, actually, we're good at project management and we want to work in a cooperative style. NEC suits our ethos. Versus, actually, we've got no interest in being collaborative, neither of the contractors. We want a big bun fight, and to resolve the issues at the end, well, let's go FIDIC. Yeah, I'm generalizing and simplifying. But based on these things, it's the best fit conditions of contract. In the UK, it's almost now, if you're in civil engineering, water, etc., NEC is almost a given, but not necessarily. And then what we're doing is we're fine-tuning the risks. So, for instance, are we adding or deleting compensation events? So if it's an operational facility, we'll transfer some of the risk. They have to allow some stuff for operational movements, but beyond a certain threshold, we might have it as a compensation event. What are the share or the thresholds? If it's a target cost contract, what's the allocation of pain and gain? Do we cap it at some point? Or do we, as a big client, take the risk ourselves or the uncertainty of significant overrun? The remedy amounts. So if something goes wrong, how much damages do we put on them? Do we make them nominal, £1 a day, or do we give the full costs? All those will affect the amount of risk that the contracting party puts in the contract, in the prices. It might even affect whether they bid or not, and it will affect motivations during the contract once let. Okay. So, and that's just some of the stuff on information gathering and prioritizing. I think you do have to look at a project and how it fits into a program. In the same way, you have to look into if the package fits into the overall project. Is it critical technically or program wise? So the project overall might be least cost, but if this package is on the critical path, you might be saying, actually, the critical thing is that we complete it early, as soon as possible, because that will minimize the total expenditure. Right? So look at that package and how it affects the wider environment. IT projects, they talk about minimum viable product or minimum functionality. So what does it have to do? What would it not be nice to do? Is it affordable to have the nices? You know? Or we're cost constrained, let's just go for the basics. And we talked about those things. And if the previous stages have been done well, as in we've got a good business case for the project, we've broken it down into packages, sensible packages, and we've got a good brief about why we've done it into this package and the risks associated with it, actually this should be relatively easy, yeah? Or a lot should be already there. My experience, sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, yeah? Okay, and you have to go looking for it. Prioritizing and getting specific, sorting the wheat from the chaff. Yeah, and I think getting specific, be clear and specific. It's very easy to be vague and general because it's high level, but that can come back to bite you because then you get later disagreements. So we haven't got time to do this in here. It's your homework. When the slides come through to you, you'll have these slides. So like this, what I'd like you to do is, if you can, is think of a contract okay, and work through the slides, entering what comes into your mind, then refine and prioritize, and then go and talk to your colleagues. And what I want you to do in between this week and next week, because I think it will aid you, it'll help get this stuff in your mind and help develop your understanding, is basically go for this package, what's your organization's drivers? Yeah. What's its what's important to your organization? Therefore, as a result, what are the project objectives or the package objectives? What are the principal threats and opportunities? And I've put PESTLE, which stands for political, economic, social, technical, legal, and environmental, as a sort of bit of a jogger, memory jogger. What are the likely participants' strengths and weaknesses, financially, technically, and so on? And if you're a main contractor, what you could do is you could say you could say for a particular subcontract, deal with a particular subcontract package, and think about how you allocate risk and reward, and so on. So last or a little bit, and I'm thinking, looking at time, we might be. We'll see where we get to on this. So one of the fundamental divisions or ways you can divide up contract strategies is into price-based ones and cost or input-based ones. A price-based one, the basis is offer and acceptance. Okay, so I offer to do this new road for £1 million. It doesn't matter whether it costs me 900,000 or 1.1 million pounds. If nothing changes, you'll pay me £1 million. Yeah, that's a price-based contract. A cost or input-based contract is where the base for payment is what it costs the contractor to do the work, and you reimburse that payment, that cost, with a markup, if you like. In a similar theme, I talked about cost or input-based contracts. An input-based contract could be, give me a price for a consultant and I will pay per time that they are used. Yeah. Not strictly be speaking cost, because the profit could be in that consultant and you might not know how much is cost and how much is profit, but it's an input base. You're paying for the input. What I like you to do is just think about this, 3 scenarios and which one would apply. So scenario 1 is a power generating project using mature technology. So you as a client could define what you want as a performance spec potentially, and there is a mature industry out there who can give it to you. So would it be a price-based, a cost-based contract, or a cost-based contract with some frills on top, by which I mean some incentivization on there? Second one, a ring road through the center, around the center of a medium-sized city. So in the city, lots of operational constraints in terms of what they can do. The contractor could come up with lots of whiz-o-whiz ways of doing it better. If only we could access this, have this for a weekend shutdown or a week, which would cause a lot of short-term disruption, but it would reduce long-term the disruption. Yeah, that would save a lot of money, which could then be reinvested back in to get a better project. Contractor can come up with the ideas, but it's the client who manages, who's got all the stakeholder links, yeah, and can effectively influence stakeholders as to whether the contractor can do it. So a lot of interdependencies in that. Price-based, purely cost-based, or cost-based with an incentive mechanism like a target cost contract. Scenario 3, development of an advanced military technology from proof of concept. So it works in theory. Yeah. We've got it working in the lab. Yeah. But from proof of concept to proof in practice, does it work out in the field? Not how we're going to manufacture it, but will it work in practice? All right. So never been done before. Price-based, cost-based, or something on top. And the exercise for you to think about is, as I've said, which one should you use? Okay. So any bonuses on top and what for? Okay. So I'll put those up and I'll just give you 2 minutes, and that's literally all it is, just to think about it. Think about, well, depending on whether I go for a price-based or a cost-based or a cost with incentive, how am I allocating the risk effectively? And think back to those principles. So if I give you a couple of minutes, literally, just to think about that, put your thoughts down, and then we'll do a bit of recap. Someone said something.
John, it's Charles. Can you please just go to a previous slide? I just wanted to take that explanation for the course.
This one here.
No, the other one, previous one. Before the, yeah, before this one.
Right,
yeah, this one. Okay.
And as I said, cost or input based. Yeah, input is where you're paying for the cost, a price for a resource, not a fixed price for doing the work, if you like. Okay. So it is just to get you thinking, just to get the juices flowing. So for scenario 1, what did people think? So let's do hands up. Hands up who thought a price-based contract. Got up to 16. Keep them up. Keep them up. 28. 30. Yeah, quite a few. Yep. How many thought a input-based or cost-based contract? So hands down from previous people and hands up for an input-based contract or cost-based contract. We've got 6, 7, something like that. And hands up for some sort of cost-based or input-based with an incentive. 3. The majority, I would say, are right. Yeah. If it could be a very complex technology, but it's a mature technology. And therefore, if you can define it well, you can hand the risk over to someone who manages the risk and it's low risk for them. Yeah. And that's one of the important points is think about risk from the contracting party's point of view. It's low risk for them because that's what they do. Yeah. It's a mature technology. And if you can define it well, they can give a price as a result for it. Okay. So I would say a price-based contract. What about scenario 2? The one that I've got in mind is Sheffield Inner Ring Road, to be honest. So I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. Price-based so there's risk interdependency here. The contractor can come up with lots of whiz-o-whiz ideas, both for value engineering it, but also methodology, which was absolutely critical in an inner city ring road. But it's the client who can manage the stakeholders to say, great whiz-o-whiz idea. Let's go and have a word and see if they will relax a constraint or whatever and let it happen. So, price-based contract. We've got 3. Purely cost-based contract, cost reimbursable or input-based. We've got, it looks like 5 or 7, so a few more for that. Cost-based with an incentive mechanism on top. How many people we've got there? Oh, we've got more, yeah. Yes, and I would say yes, and it was a target cost contract. Because for those risks, there was interdependency. So having a pain gain share mechanism where both parties take the gain or take the pain meant that there was that joint incentive to come up with those innovations, those opportunities. Okay. And actually, going back to what I was saying earlier, it was funded by a big government grant. So any savings they could find during the contract, if they could forecast them, they could actually say, hey, we're forecast to save, I don't know, 5 million or a couple of £1 million. Actually, we can reinvest that back in the project to get a better project. So for Sheffield City Council, it might be a better whole life cost. Yeah. For the stakeholders who are having to put up with it is if you can put up with this disruption, we'll save this money and you can get, I don't know, much lighter, nicer street lights. So it's more attractive road for people to shop in or whatever. Perhaps not in an ring road, but you get what I'm getting at. Which then kind of leads with this one, scenario 3, cost or input based or frills on top. What do people think? So price-based, anybody for price-based contract on this? No, well, no increase from the 3 or 4. Cost-based, cost stroke input-based. So purely, we've got 14 and rising, 20. Okay, yeah. Some sort of pain gain share mechanism or bonuses for it, incentives. Yeah, second popular, possibly, yeah. Yeah, here it's an advanced technology. If you said, led a contract saying, You've got to prove that, yep. Otherwise, you're not getting paid. They might come up with a proof, even though it wasn't, yep. You're over incentivizing them, if you like. You might want control of their resources and say at some point, actually, we're flogging a dead horse. So I would go cost-based for that. I might add in a bit of an incentive, a bonus if they do it, but I wouldn't want to over-incentivize them. I wouldn't want them to be going, my God, we have to do it, otherwise we're losing loads of money, or you're going to sue us or whatever. So it would be based on a consultancy basis and an input basis. Okay. Hope that just got you thinking about risk allocation and the sorts of contracts there. Yeah. Will I do this? I will do this slide and then I'll call it a day, and then we'll look at this stuff straight in on the next. Actually, what I'll do, I'll just do this. And NEC4's objectives. So NEC, when it was conceived, despite the more recent blurb, collaboration was not in there, right? Its three main aims were to achieve greater flexibility, clarity and simplicity, and stimulus to good management compared with other forms of contract. So JCT, the building contract, the old ICE conditions, which Thomas Telford sold, or the Institution of Civil Engineers sold the copyright to the Institution of Civil Engineering Surveyors to that, and FIDIC, which is the international conditions of contract. It was trying to achieve greater flexibility, greater clarity and simplicity, greater stimulus to good management. Flexibility is the one we're going to focus on and is directly related to contract strategy. So the aspects of flexibility are, I will do these slides, are a whole family of interlocking contracts for works, goods and services. And this is what we'll be essentially going through next week. When do we use these different contracts? Okay. Across the whole family, there is a similar structure and terminology across the whole family, with the exception of the adjudicators and the frameworks contract. That has lots of benefits in terms of familiarity, using the same systems both up and down the supply chain. So Dan's on HS2, they use a contract management system at main contract level and at subcontract level. All right. If you're a client, you can use it across the portfolio of your projects and have similar systems, etc. The long contracts, by which I mean the ones which don't have short in them, are modular in structure at two levels. There's the main payment option, price-based contracts, cost-based contracts, and then there's this pick and mix selection of secondary options to really fine-tune the risk allocation. We'll get onto those third, fourth, and finish off in the fifth. The engineering construction contract allows for any extent of contract design. So it could go completely from a performance spec, give me a power station which produces Y megawatts at X% efficiency, all the way through to this is what you've got to build, here's my design, or anywhere in between. And you fine-tune it further by writing entries in the contract data, and you know they're entries in the contract data because they're in italics or as stated in the contract data. So we will get on to filling in that contract data. Okay. Clarity and simplicity was the second one. Basically, I'll cover it very quickly. A better structure and a common structure so people with some familiarity can find their way around the contract and know, and things logically structured, and then easier to read sentences, both by the type of words they use, the sentence length and the sentence structure. So it uses the present active, which is essentially who does what to whom, not abstract legalese. And then the last one objective was to stimulate good management. Now, the reason I put good project management in there is because the co-instigators, my professor and Martin Barnes, were fellows of the Association for Project Management. In fact, Martin Barnes co-founded the Association for Project Management, was an ex-chair of it, an ex-president of it, and an ex-president of what was the European Association for Project Management. So it's really project management, not good management. The stimulus is to having sanctions, incentives to try and get people to do the things which the contract says they should do. And it has much more in the contract on the program. It has this requirement to early warn and give early notice of issues, and there's a sanction in there. The compensation event process is much more defined, both in terms of, is it a compensation event, yes or no? And that affects risks, because essentially a compensation event is a client risk. All right. And a much clearer process in how they're evaluated, and more criteria which you need to know about for how much in terms of time and cost. All actions have a time scale attached to them, so it's not within a reasonable time. There are fixed time, maximum time scales, and then you have these separate roles of the people, which is intended to, rather than having a designer, an engineer managing the contract, who might be a very good, brilliant design engineer, but not a good contract manager, yeah, to separate out the roles. Okay, those were the three, very briefly, the three main objectives. The rest of the course, we're going to focus on flexibility. Last slide for today, in terms of objectives for the 4th edition, was inspire increased use of NEC in markets and sectors, so even more flexibility across different sectors. Support new approaches to procurement. So, for instance, it introduced an early contractor involvement option, and tweaks and improvements to the stimulus to good project management. So, for instance, in NEC4, option A, the price contract, it introduced value engineering clauses, where if the contractor comes up with a suggestion for saving money, they get a share of it, okay, to promote good project management. That's it, apart from just a quick key slide recap. These early stages feed into the packaging contract strategy, which is what we're going to focus on. But decisions made here affect subsequent things down here. Absolutely key to contract strategy, in fact, project procurement strategy, are these principles of risk allocation and sharing. So drum these into you. Yeah, okay. This is the overall process, the thinking process. If you can, just try and apply it with a package. It'll help retention, it'll help understanding. And lastly, think about defining your project at these different levels as a thinking process. And then what's the level to actually contract with? All right, okay. So with that, bang on 6 o'clock, my God, that's a fluke. So I took a bit longer than I expected on the earlier ones. If you've got questions, you've got my emails there, drop me them. I might have a recap and review based on those questions at the start of next week. Okay. Clear up any misunderstandings, or can you go over this a bit more, or whatever, can you expand upon that? So do drop me a line if you've got questions. Okay, with that, I'm going to say bye-bye and have my supper.